This is what Pokemon used to be. This is what it became. And this is a game from a completely different franchise that somehow became the Pokemon game that we were promised, but we never got. And over the next hour, I'm going to prove that to you with side-by-side comparisons, cut content you probably forgot existed, and one really uncomfortable question. Why did Game Freak abandon everything that made Pokemon great? By the end of this video, you're never going to look at Pokemon the same way. Let's start when everything was perfect. If you started playing Pokemon between 2002 and 2010, then you experienced the golden era of Pokemon and didn't even know it. Between Generations 3 and 5, Game Freak established a precedent. They showed us Pokemon could be challenging without being unfair, expansive without bloated, and respectful of players' and their intelligence without alienating the newcomers. Then Generation 6 happened, and that precedent was quietly abandoned. Features were cut, difficulty was stripped away, routes became hallways, and when fans complained, Game Freak told us that we had outgrown Pokemon, that modern players wanted simpler games. But here's the thing, they were wrong. In 2021, Capcom released Monster Hunter Stories 2, a turn-based monster collector that delivered everything that modern Pokemon had abandoned. And it was praised for exactly the things that Game Freak said players didn't want anymore: challenge and complexity and depth. So let's start at the peak. Let's talk about what Pokemon was before we talk about what it became. The Battle Frontier is the single greatest post-game facility in Pokemon history, and it's not even close. Introduced in Pokemon Emerald and refined in Pokemon Platinum, the Battle Frontier was 7 different facilities, each with unique rule sets that changed how you built your team. Battle Factory. You don't use your own team, you're given random Pokemon and must adapt on the fly. This tests your knowledge of the entire Pokédex, not just your favorites. The Battle Pike, a roguelike dungeon where you navigate rooms with random effects. Luck-based, but with risk management. Do you heal before the next room, or should you save your resources? Battle Pyramid. You explore a dark maze, finding items and fighting trainers with limited visibility. It was a survival challenge. Battle Dome. A tournament bracket where you analyze opponents' teams before fighting. This rewarded research and preparation. Battle Arena. Pokemon are judged on aggression and performance, not just HP. Stalling doesn't work here. You have to play offensively. Battle Palace. You don't control your Pokemon, they act based on their nature. This forced you to understand the AI's behavior and build teams accordingly. The Battle Tower. Traditional 3v3 battles, but with opponents using competitive strategies and held items. This was a skill check. Beating all 7 facilities earned you the gold symbol and the title Frontier Brain Champion. This wasn't a participation trophy. This was content designed for players who had mastered the game's mechanics and wanted a real challenge. And here's the key detail. This was optional. If you just want to beat the Elite Four and catch legendaries, you could. But if you wanted depth, it was there waiting for you. Modern Pokemon has the Battle Tower. 1 facility, 1 rule set, no variety. The Battle Frontier respects your time by offering meaningful challenge. The Battle Tower wastes your time through repetition. But the Battle Frontier wasn't the only thing that Gen 3 and 4 got right. The world design was fundamentally different. Routes had branching paths, caves required HMs and puzzle solving, you could get lost. You could miss hidden items, you could stumble into areas you weren't ready for and get wrecked. Mount Coronet in Platinum is a multi-floor dungeon that connects multiple cities. You pass through this thing several times during the story, and each time you're accessing new areas with the new HMs that you've gained. This is environmental storytelling at its best. The mountain grows with you. Compare that to the Galar Mine and Sword and Shield, it's a straight line. There's no branching pathways, there's no hidden rooms, there's not even a reason to return. You walk forward, you fight trainers in a row, you exit. It's not even a dungeon, it's a hallway with random encounters. Getting lost in the Wayward Cave made finding the exit rewarding. Modern Pokemon has removed all frustration by removing challenge, and in doing so, it removed the satisfaction of overcoming obstacles. Generation 4 trusted you to figure things out, it respected your intelligence, and that respect is what made victory meaningful. Then came Generation 5, and Game Freak decided to do something radical. Tell a story that mattered. N wasn't a villain, He was an ideological opponent with a legitimate worldview. Team Plasma questioned the ethics of Pokemon training. They asked, is capturing creatures and forcing them to fight exploitation? Are we the heroes? Or are we just villains justifying our actions? And the game didn't even give you an answer. Yes, Genesis was manipulating everyone, but N genuinely believed in liberation. Your rival struggled with whether strength was enough to justify his journey. Bianca questioned if she was even cut out to be a trainer. These weren't cartoon villains twirling their mustaches and tying people up on train tracks. These were characters. They had arcs, they had doubt, they had beliefs. And the climax had you battling N in his castle while it rises from the ground around the Pokemon League. He summons a legendary dragon, you summon the opposing legendary dragon, and the fate of all of Unova hangs in the balance of this one battle. This was spectacle. Yes, but it was earned spectacle. The entire game built to this moment, and when you won, it felt like you actually resolved a philosophical conflict, not just beat the bad guy. No Pokemon game before or since has attempted this level of narrative ambition. And then Black 2 and White 2 came out and delivered the most content-rich Pokemon games ever made. The Pokemon World Tournament brought back every gym leader and champion from Gens 1 through 4. You could fight Red, you could fight Blue, Lance, Steven, Cynthia, everyone. This is fan service done right. The challenge mode and easy mode let you adjust difficulty. Challenge mode raised levels, improved AI, and gave opponents much better movesets. Finally, an official hard mode. The Battle Tower and White Tree Hollow. They're both 10-floor gauntlets with scaling difficulty. The higher you climb, the tougher it got. Join Avenue was a social hub that grew based on your interactions. It had shops, services, and customization. Pokestar Studio. It let you film movies with scripted battles and branching outcomes. And low-key, this thing was awesome. The Medal System was an achievement system with 255 medals to earn. This game was designed for players who wanted to sink 200 plus hours into a single playthrough. Every system fed into another, everything had depth, and critically, none of this was mandatory. You could ignore Join Avenue or Pokestar Studio entirely if you just wanted to battle. But if you wanted to engage, the game rewarded you. Generation 5 proved that Pokemon could have a sophisticated narrative, a challenging gameplay, and a massive post-game content all in one. And then Game Freak looked at that blueprint and said, burn it. But before we talk about abandonment, let's talk about the games that Game Freak just wishes you would forget about. While Game Freak was developing the perfect handheld formula, Genius Sonority was doing something completely different on the GameCube. Pokemon Coliseum opened with your protagonist blowing up a building. No Oak intro, no are you a boy or a girl. You're Wes, an ex-criminal in a post-apocalyptic desert region. There's no wild Pokemon. Your only option is to steal Shadow Pokemon, which are corrupted creatures with their hearts closed from the villains using them. This was Pokemon as a Western, a morally great protagonist, a harsh, lawless environment, high stakes, and a redemption arc for every single Pokemon you purify. Shadow Pokemon were mechanically distinct. They had boosted stats but could only use shadow moves and would occasionally disobey. You had to purify them through battle, which gradually opened their hearts. This added narrative weight to every capture. You weren't just capturing and collecting them, you were saving them. XD Gala Darkness doubled down on this with Shadow Lugia, a corrupted legendary that became the game's iconic image. The final boss uses it against you, and purifying it is the ultimate redemption. These games asked, what if Pokemon had stakes? What if your actions mattered beyond collecting some badges? And Game Freak's answer was apparently, we're gonna pretend those games don't exist. But beyond narrative, the GameCube games showcased what Pokemon battles could look like with proper resources. Every attack had unique animations. Flamethrower wasn't just a generic fire effect. It was a stream of flames that engulfed the opponent. Pokemon reacted to being hit. They had personality in their idle stances. These games came out in 2003 and 2005. Pokemon Sword and Shield came out in 2019 on vastly superior hardware. And yeah, The animations were worse. When Game Freak said it cut half the Pokédex to improve animation quality, this is why fans were furious. Genius Sonority proved 15 years earlier that Pokemon could have high-quality animations. Game Freak just chose not to prioritize it. These games sold millions of copies, critics praised them, fans loved them, and Game Freak learned absolutely nothing from them. No future mainline game attempted this narrative maturity. No game matched the battle presentation. Shadow Pokemon were abandoned. Double battles, which were mandatory in Colosseum and XD, were regulated to optional gimmicks in future games. Game Freak had a blueprint for evolving Pokemon beyond the established formula. Genius Sonority showed them how to respect players' intelligence while telling darker, more mature stories. And instead of building on any of that, Game Freak decided to go in the opposite direction. Generation 6 was supposed to be the franchise's 3D renaissance. The polygonal graphics, the first mainline game on the Nintendo 3DS, and in many ways it was beautiful. It was also the beginning of the end. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, there's an area called the Battle Resort, and on that island, there's a little sign, Battle Frontier Project, coming soon. Data miners found 3D models of Battle Frontier facilities in the game's code. Game Freak had started building it, and then they stopped. Instead, we got the Battle Mason, a single facility copy and pasted from X and Y. When asked about this, director Shigeru Amori said, "We didn't include the Battle Frontier because only a small number of players would have appreciated it." Let that sink in. Game Freak cut the Battle Frontier because they decided most players wouldn't use it. By that logic, shouldn't we cut the post-game entirely? Most players don't even complete the Pokédex. Most players don't breed competitive teams. Should we remove all that too? This was the first sign of a philosophy shift. If a feature required effort or skill, then it wasn't worth including. But the Battle Frontier wasn't the only casualty. Generation 6 introduced a change that would permanently break Pokemon's difficulty curve. In previous generations, the XP share was a held item that split experience between two Pokemon. It was a tool for training under-leveled team members without grinding. In Generation 6, it became a key item that gave full experience to your entire party simultaneously. This broke everything. You couldn't avoid over-leveling. Your entire team gained experience from every battle, meaning by the time you reached the Elite Four, you were at least 10 to 15 levels higher than your opponents. In X and Y, you could still turn it off, but the game was balanced around it being on. So turning it off made the game way too easy in a different way. You'd steamroll with your starter while the rest of your team just lagged behind. The 6th gym in X and Y has Pokemon in the low 40s. If you use XP share, your team is level 50 plus. There's no challenge, there's no strategy, you just click moves and win. Game Freak's solution to players grinding too much was to make grinding automatic and unavoidable. They fixed a problem that didn't exist by creating one. Game Freak's solution to players grinding too much was to make grinding automatic and unavoidable. They fixed a problem that didn't exist by creating one that couldn't be solved. And this wasn't just about difficulty. Over-leveling removes strategic thinking. When you're 15 levels higher than your opponent, type matchups do not matter. Move choices do not matter. Team composition does not matter. You're not even playing Pokemon anymore. You're just watching numbers go up. And then there's the world design. Route 119 in Hoenn, multiple branching paths, hidden items behind weather effects, optional areas that require things like surf and waterfall, trainers that you could avoid or challenge. There were secrets to discover. Route 15 in Kalos for X and Y is a straight line. There are no branching paths, there's no hidden areas, there's no reason to explore. And this pattern repeats throughout X and Y. Routes are simplified, caves are shortened, dungeons are removed entirely. Reflection Cave, which should be a complex maze, is 3 rooms. Victory Road is shorter than some mid-game routes with previous generations. And when routes do have multiple paths, NPCs block them until you've completed the story objectives. The game doesn't trust you to explore. It holds your hand and points you in the right direction. Generation 6 established a new philosophy. Players should never be confused, never be lost, and never be challenged. And it only gets worse from here. But we need to jump ahead for a moment to talk about the most controversial decision in Pokemon history. In June 2019, during a Pokemon Sword and Shield presentation, Game Freak announced that not all Pokemon would be transferable to the new game. This had never happened before. Every previous generation allowed you to transfer your entire collection. Pokemon you caught in 2003 could be moved to 2019. This was the core promise of the franchise. Your Pokemon were permanent. You could follow them everywhere. Gotta catch them all. And then suddenly, they couldn't. Over 400 Pokemon were cut from Sword and Shield. Fan favorites like Greninja, Dragonite, the entire Squirtle line were just gone. Competitive staples were removed. People's childhood companions couldn't come home. The backlash was immediate, and it was fierce. Game Freak's justification was that they needed the higher quality animations and models. Masuda said, quote, "We knew at some point we'd have to make a decision. The Pokemon library had grown so large that it was no longer feasible to include every species." End quote. And then data miners discovered the truth. The models in Sword and Shield were identical to the 3D models from X and Y and Sun and Moon. Same polygon counts, same rigging, same textures, just slightly upscaled. The animations weren't improved. Wingull still used its frozen hovering animation from 2013. The infamous double kick animation where the Pokemon spins in place is still there. These animations are from 2003 and have more personality and impact than the animations from 2019. Game Freak said they cut Pokemon to improve quality. The evidence shows that they cut Pokemon to save development time. And that's the part that hurts. But Dexit wasn't just about cut Pokemon, it was about what it represented. Game Freak had been cutting features for years. Battle Frontier, Pokemon following you, the Poke Radar, the Versus Seeker to rematch trainers, the PSS online system, Mega Evolution, Z moves, the GTS, difficulty modes, the Pokeathlon, contests in their full form, secret bases, safari zones, the underground. Every generation introduced new features and then abandoned them. Nothing was built upon, nothing was refined, everything was disposable. Sword and Shield introduced Dynamax, a mechanic that made Pokemon gigantic for 3 turns. It replaced Mega Evolutions and Z moves, and everyone knew it would be gone in the next generation. And it was. Scarlet and Violet removed Dynamax entirely. Dexit was the moment that fans realized Game Freak wasn't building a franchise. They were churning out a product. Each game was disposable. Each feature was temporary. Nothing mattered beyond the current generation. And the saddest part, the game still sold over 25 million copies. Game Freak learned that they could cut all the corners, remove all the features, and deliver technically compromised products, and the fans would still buy them up anyways. So they kept doing it. Generation 7 had ambition. Lusamae is one of the best antagonists in the series. The Alola region had personality. The story had emotional weight. But you couldn't play it for more than 5 minutes without the game interrupting you. In the first hour of Sun and Moon, you spend approximately 35-45 minutes in cutscenes and tutorials. You don't get to choose your starter until 30 minutes in. You don't have free exploration until nearly an hour. And then there's the Rom-Tom Dex, an AI companion that literally never stops talking. It tells you where to go, it reminds you of your objectives, it marks your map with the exact location of your next destination. It's a little annoying. You can't turn it off. You can't make it stop. The game also added an indicator that shows which moves are super effective after you've encountered a Pokemon once. This removes the core skills of Pokemon. Learning type matchups. You don't need to remember that Psychic is weak to Dark. You don't need to experiment. The game tells you the answer. And again, you can't turn this off. And the worst part is the world design. Routes in Alola are literally corridors. There are waist-high walls blocking exploration, ledges preventing backtracking, NPCs blocking side paths until the story trigger occurs. Route 1 in Alola is a paved road with fences on both sides. You can't leave the path, there's nothing to explore, it's a theme park ride. Compare that to Route 1 in Kanto. Yes, it's simple, it's the first route. There's tall grass you can avoid or engage with, there's trainers that you can battle or skip, there's a ledge that teaches you about one-way paths. It's basic, but it teaches you the rules of exploration through gameplay, not tutorials. Alola's islands are small, linear, and heavily restricted. Early Sinnoh is open, interconnected, and rewards exploration. The hardware didn't get weaker, the design philosophy did. And then came Sword and Shield, and everything I described got worse. The wild area was supposed to be Pokemon's open world evolution. Instead, it's an empty field with pop-ins so aggressive that Pokemon appear 10 feet in front of you. Routes are somehow even more linear. Route 10, the final route before Victory Road, is a straight hallway. No branching paths, no hidden items, no optional areas. Your rival heals your Pokemon before major battles. The game will not let you fail. The XP share is mandatory, you can't turn it off. Game Freak removed that option entirely. By the time you reach Champion Leon, your team is at least 10 plus levels higher than his. The, quote, unbeatable champion is a pushover because the game forced you to overlevel your entire team. Sword and Shield are games that play themselves. And when fans criticize this, Game Freak's response was clear. Here's the part that's gonna make you angry. Pokemon is the highest grossing media franchise in human history. As of 2024, it's generated over 150 billion with a B in revenue. But here's the breakdown. Merchandise is 64%. Video games are 17%. The card game is 10%. The box office is 5%. Mangas and animes are 4%. The games are 17% of the franchise's revenue. And within that 17 still includes the mobile games like Pokemon Go, Pokemon Masters, and those two generate more money consistently than the mainline games. The mainline games exist to introduce new Pokemon for merchandise, to drive anime viewership, and to maintain the brand's awareness. The games aren't the product, they're the marketing for the product. The Pokemon Company operates on a 3-year cycle. Year 1, new generation launches. Year 2, expanded version and/or sequel, and the year 3, remakes or spin-offs. This cycle is synchronized with the anime, the card game releases, and the merchandise waves. Sword and Shield were likely in development for 2 to 3 years. For comparison, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was in development for 5 to 6 years. Game Freak has approximately 170 employees. The Zelda team had over 300 developers working on Breath of the Wild. This is why Scarlet and Violet launched in such an unfinished state. Severe frame rate drops, Pokemon clipping through terrain, multiplayer barely functional, game-breaking bugs. And despite being the most technically broken Pokemon game ever released, they sold over 20 million copies in their first 6 weeks. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Game Freak has no financial incentive to change. Sword and Shield, 25 million plus copies sold. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, 15 plus million copies. Arceus Legend, 14 plus million copies. Scarlet and Violet, 23 plus million copies. Every game sells better than the last game regardless of quality. Fans complain online, critics point out the flaws, and then everyone buys the game anyway. So Game Freak learned that they can cut content, remove Pokemon, simplify gameplay, release technically broken products. They can ignore the fans' feedback and still break the sales records. The games that we want, challenging and feature-rich and technically polished, are not the games that maximize profit. So they're not the games we get. But what if I told you the game that we wanted already existed? It's just not called Pokemon. In July 2021, Capcom released Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin. It was a sequel to a 3DS game most people hadn't played, a turn-based spin-off of an action franchise, a JRPG monster collector that would inevitably be compared to Pokemon. The critics praised it for delivering everything modern Pokemon had abandoned: challenge, depth, exploration, respect for the players. Let me show you how. Monster Hunter Stories 2 takes place in a world where riders bond with their monsters instead of hunting them. You're a descendant of a legendary rider, Red, and you've been chosen by a Rathalos egg, a species that's supposed to be untamable. When that Rathalos hatches, it triggers a chain of events involving elder dragons, ancient prophecies, and a world-ending catastrophe. And the story's pretty generic, anime fare, I'll be honest. But the world design is not. Regions are vast, multi-layered environments with caves, cliffs, and hidden areas. You'll find paths you can't access because you need monsties with rock break or ivy climb or swim. There are treasures hidden off the beaten paths, secret dens with rare monsters, NPCs with side quests that unlock even more new areas. The game gives you a destination and it trusts that you'll find your way. There's no rom-tom decks marking your map, no NPCs blocking paths, no hand-holding. You get lost, and that's the point. But the real genius is the monster den system. Scattered throughout the world are monster dens, caves where monsters nest. You fight your way to the center, and at the end, there's a nest with eggs that you get to pick from. You can take one egg per den. Each egg has a pattern on it and a weight. Heavier eggs tend to have better genes. Rare patterns indicate rare monsters. But you don't know what's inside till you hatch it. When you hatch an egg, you discover its genes, passive abilities that affect its stats, give it new moves, or provide it resistances. Every monster of the same species has different genes. This creates a loop. Explore, find den, collect eggs, hatch them, check genes, build the team. And because dens respawn, you can farm specific areas for specific monsters with specific gene combinations. It's addictive in the same way early Pokemon was addictive. There's always one more den to explore, one more egg to hatch. Compare this to the modern Pokemon where legendaries just stand in the overworld waiting for you to go up and press A. There's no discovery, no excitement. You see Articuno, you save the game, you catch it, done. Monster Hunter Stories 2 makes you work for your monstie, and that work makes them valuable. And then there's the kinship, the bond between the rider and the monstie. Kinship isn't a friendship meter you fill by playing mini games. It's a combat resource that builds as you fight alongside your monstie. When your kinship is high, you can perform double attacks, coordinated strikes where you and your monstie attack together. The animations are spectacular, and they make you feel like a team. You can also activate kinship skills, which are like ultimate attacks where you mount your monstie and unleash a devastating move. These are like your limit breaks, and they're earned through strategic play, and they are not handed to you. This is what Pokemon bonding should feel like. Not petting your Pokemon in a camp, not making it curry or a sandwich. An actual mechanical integration that makes the bond between trainer and monster matter in the gameplay. Now let's do a few direct comparisons because this is where it starts to get alarming. Route 7 in Pokemon Sword is a straight path with no branching routes. There are trainers in a line. There's nothing hidden. You walk forward and you exit. Compare that to Loloska in Monster Hunter Stories 2. Has multiple elevation levels, caves that branch into hidden areas, NPCs with side quests, dens scattered throughout, monsters roaming that you can avoid or engage. If you explore, you get rewarded. There are treasure chests with rare materials, high-rank monster dens in hidden corners. There are NPCs who give you side quests that unlock new features. The game respects your curiosity. In Pokemon, NPCs block your path until you complete story objectives. The game doesn't trust you to explore freely. In Monster Hunter Stories 2, you can't access an area. It's because you need a specific monstie ability. The game tells you, you need Rock Break to pass this. So you know to come back later when you've hatched a monstie with that ability. This is gating. And this is gating done right. It's not arbitrary. It's mechanical. It's encouraging you to explore your monster roster. Pokemon battles in modern games are super effective move, opponent faints, repeat. The type effectiveness indicator tells you what works. Your over-leveled team ensures you one-shot everything. There's zero strategy involved. Monster Hunter Story 2's head-to-head system is a rock, paper, scissors at its core. Speed beats power, power beats technical, technical beats speed. But layered on top of that, you're predicting what attack type the monster is going to use based on its behavior. You're managing your kinship to enable better attacks. You're positioning your monsties with gene builds that complement each other. You're using skills that buff and debuff and apply status effects. And you're managing a party of 6 where you can switch in and out mid-battle. Now, when you lose a head-to-head, there are consequences. Your monstie takes extra damage. Your opponent builds kinship. You lose momentum. Battles require you to think, adapt, and sometimes even retreat. The champion battle in Pokemon Sword, Leon is supposed to be unbeatable champion. His team's in the low 60s. If you've used the Force XP share, your team should be around the 70s. You steamroll him without strategy. Velkhana is a legendary post-game boss in Monster Hunter Stories 2. It's an Elder Dragon with multiple phases, has devastating attacks, and you need to learn its mechanics to win. It can freeze your entire party, it has attacks that hit all monsties, and it changes its attack patterns multiple times mid-fight. If you're underleveled, or you don't have the right gene build, you're gonna lose. The game does not apologize for this battle. When you finally win, it feels like you earned it. You've learned its patterns, you've optimized your team, and you've executed your strategy. This is exactly what Pokemon battles used to feel like. Sword and Shield's postgame is the Battle Tower. One facility, repetitive battles, minimal rewards. Monster Hunter Stories 2 postgame includes superpowered Elder Dragons with rematches with new movesets, the Elder's Lair, a randomized dungeon with scaling difficulty, co-op multiplayer battles, gene farming for perfect builds, subquests that unlock unique monsties. The post-game Elder Dragons are genuinely difficult. They require optimized gene builds, proper equipment, the mastery of the battle system. This is the content designed for players who have beaten the story and want a real challenge. These are Monster Hunter Story 2's legendaries, and it feels like a legendary battle. This is the Battle Frontier philosophy applied to a modern game. So what does Monster Hunter Stories 2 understand that modern Pokemon doesn't? It understands that players want to be challenged and not coddled. Monster Hunter Stories 2 doesn't have tutorials that last for hours. The opening teaches you the basics in 15 minutes, then just lets you play. It trusts you to figure out the deeper systems through exploration. The gene system is never fully explained. You discover through trial and error that you can transfer genes between monsties, that certain gene combinations create bingo bonuses that give elemental matching effects for damage output. The game gives you the tools and lets you experiment. Pokemon explains everything constantly. The Rom-Tom Dex tells you where to go, NPCs explain type matchups, the game marks your objectives. Monster Hunter Stories 2 respects your intelligence. Pokemon assumes you have none. But here's the critical distinction. Monster Hunter Stories 2 has depth, not bloat. The gene system is deep. 9 gene slots per monstie. Genes can be transferred via rite of channeling. Bingo lines give bonuses. Elemental matching matters. But you can also ignore all of that if you want. You can beat the story with whatever monsties you like using the default gene layout. I didn't even start messing around with the genes until more than halfway through the game. The depth is there for players who want to engage with it. If you want to build a Tobi Kadachi with a full lightning bingo line and optimize attack genes, you can spend dozens of hours farming for perfect builds. If you just want to ride a cool monster and experience the story, that's super cool too. Compare this to Pokemon, which removes depth entirely rather than making it optional. Contests, Battle Frontier, following Pokemon, difficulty modes, all gone because Game Freak decided if everyone can't use it, no one should have it. Monster Hunter Stories 2 says, here are the systems for players who want depth, engage with them, or don't. Pokemon says, we remove these systems because we don't think you're smart enough to use them. And finally, Monster Hunter Stories 2 integrates its systems into its gameplay. Monstie field abilities aren't just for convenience, they're exploration tools. You need Ivy Climb to reach certain areas. You need Rock Break to access hidden caves. You need Swim to find underwater dens. You need dig to access secret restricted areas. This makes your Monstie roster matter outside of battle. You're not just collecting, you're building a toolbox. And yes, I said Monstie. They're monsters before you tame them. Once you hatch them and they're yours, then they're Monsties. Kinship isn't a friendship meter, it's a combat resource. Building bonds with your Monstie directly affects your battle effectiveness. Gene customization isn't cosmetic, it fundamentally changes how your Monstie performs. A Rathalos with fire attack genes plays completely different from one with speed genes. Compare this to Pokemon Camp. You play with your Pokemon, they get a bit happier, they might survive a hit with 1 HP sometimes. It's a minigame disconnected from the core gameplay. Or Pokemon following you, one of my favorite things, a feature fans love that was purely cosmetic. It has no mechanical benefit, and Game Freak still removed it after Let's Go because it required animation work. In Monster Hunter Stories 2, you ride your Monsties constantly. They're integrated into exploration, combat, progression. I love flying around the entire map all day long. I just fly around and look at everything. It's awesome. Monster Hunter Stories 2 makes you feel like you're bonding with creatures through shared experiences and mechanical synergy. Pokemon makes you feel like you're managing a collection, and that's the fundamental difference. Monster Hunter Stories 2 is a game about partnership. Pokemon has become a game about consumption. Now, before you think I'm done with modern Pokemon, let's talk about the one game that got it right. Pokemon Arceus Legends. Or is it Legends Arceus? Pokemon Legends Arceus. Released in January 2022, it was the first mainline game in years that felt like Game Freak was actually trying something new and really cooking. And it worked. Legends Arceus gave us open zones with actual exploration. You could see Pokemon in the environment. You could approach them stealthily. You could catch them without starting a battle. Alpha Pokemon were over-leveled threats that just roamed the map. You wander into the wrong area, you could just get demolished. The game felt like it had danger. You could ride Pokemon to traverse terrain. Widear for like ground travel. The Legion for water, Bravery for flight. These weren't just fast travel, they were exploration tools, like Monster Hunter 2's Monstie abilities. There were collectibles hidden throughout the world. Wisps, unknowns, rare Pokemon spawns, the satchels. The game rewarded exploration. This was the first time since Gen 5 that a Pokemon game felt like it respected your desire to explore. The noble Pokemon battles were actually boss fights. You had to dodge attacks, you had to throw bombs, you had to time your Pokemon battles correctly. And they were hard. Noble Arcanine and Electrode could wreak havoc if you didn't learn their patterns. And then there's Volo, the post-game super boss with a full team of 6, then Gratina's second form. This was the hardest fight in a Pokemon game in over a decade. His Garchomp was faster than almost everything. His team had coverage moves, his AI was competent. When you beat Volo, you felt like you actually accomplished something. This was Game Freak remembering that challenge makes victory meaningful. But Legends Arceus was technically rough. It had some frame rate drops, some pop-ins, dated graphics even for the Switch's standard. The post-game was still thin. After Volo, there wasn't really much left to do except for complete the Pokédex. And it also removed some of the core battle mechanics from the other games. Abilities and held items were gone, simplifying the battles. They did add in the speed and strength, but it was a step in the right direction, but it was still compromised. So if Game Freak were willing to listen, and that's a big if, here's what the classic Monster Hunter Stories 2 and even their own Arceus Legends teaches us. 1. Optional difficulty should be standard. Challenge mode in Black and 2 and White 2 was the right idea with terrible implementation. You had to beat the game first. It was version exclusive. Make it available from the start and just let the players choose their experience. Casual mode, normal mode, challenge mode. Everyone gets what they want. Fire Emblem's done it for years. It's not complicated. 2. Post-game content is not optional. The Battle Frontier, Pokemon World Tournament, and Monster Hunter Stories 2 Elder Dragon fights give players reasons to continue engaging after the credits.
Post-game content extends the life of your game. It gives competent, competitive players something to work towards, and it requires mastery. A single battle tower is not enough. There's nothing sadder than finishing the game and realizing you never got to see the true power of your team that you made, because it was so easy and there's nothing left to do. 3. Exploration requires obstacles, secrets, and risk. Linear routes with no hidden areas aren't exploration. The hallway with random encounters. Give us caves that require navigation. Give us optional areas with rare Pokemon. Give us threats that we're not ready for. Teach us that the world is bigger than we are. Let us get lost. Let us discover what we loved about Pokemon. 4th, tutorial features should be toggleable. XP share, type effective indicators, objective markers, tutorial pop-ups. All of these should be optional in the settings menu. Modern games have robust accessibility and difficulty options. God of War, The Last of Us, even Mario Odyssey has assist mode. There's no reason Pokemon can't have toggle XP share on and off, toggle battle hints on and off, toggle objective markers on and off, difficulty selection. Let new players have guidance. Let veteran players turn it all off. Everyone wins. Number 5, respect your veteran audience. The average Pokemon player is in their late 20s to early 30s. Yes, children play Pokemon, but the majority of your audience grew up with these games. And the audience that plays Elden Ring and Hollow Knight and Celeste and other challenging games, they haven't lost the ability to handle difficulty. They need to stop designing for an imaginary casual audience that doesn't exist. The people that are buying your games want depth. The popularity of difficulty ROM hacks like Radical Red and Reborn prove this. Fans are literally rebuilding games to add the challenge that Pokemon removed. Game Freak should listen to them. And finally, the technical issues need to be addressed. Scarlet and Violet launched in an unacceptable state. Game-breaking bugs, constant frame rate drops, multiplayer that barely functioned. The Switch can handle Breath of the Wild, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Bayonetta 3. The hardware is not the problem. Game Freak needs more development time, or more staff, or both. The annual release cycle is killing quality. Zelda games take 4 to 6 years. Pokemon games take 2 to 3 years to develop, and it shows. Either extend development cycles or split the workload across multiple teams. The current model isn't sustainable if we want quality products. But here's the reality. None of this is likely to happen. Scarlet and Violet have already sold 28 million copies, despite being the most technically broken Pokemon game ever released. Every complaint, every criticism, every disappointed review, none of it mattered. The game sold better than almost anything else on Switch. The Pokemon Company's revenue continues to grow. Merchandise sales are at an all-time high. The brand has never been stronger financially. Game Freak has no financial incentive to change. The formula works, the games sell, the cycle continues. And we, the fans, are complicit. We complain online all day long, we point out the flaws, we demand better, and then we buy the games on day one anyway. We have taught Game Freak that quality doesn't matter. Sales numbers are the only language corporations speak, and the numbers say everything is fine. But I don't want to end on cynicism. Legends Arceus proved Game Freak can still innovate when they try. It wasn't perfect, but it showed that they're capable of taking risks. The fan community is keeping the dream alive. ROM hacks like Radical Red, Renegade Platinum, and Blaze Black add the difficulty and features that we want. Fan games like Reborn and Rejuvenated tell mature stories with challenging gameplay. And most people just don't have the kind of access to these games. And other developers are filling the void. Temtem, Cassette Beasts, even the controversial PAL Worlds. They're all trying to be what Pokemon won't. Monster Hunter Stories 2 proved that the game we want is possible. It exists, it's out there, and it's excellent. The blueprint for great monster collecting RPGs hasn't been lost. Game Freak just chose to abandon it. But the rest of the industry didn't. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. 45 minutes is a long time to hear somebody rant about the good old days of Pokemon. But here's why it matters. Pokemon means something to millions of people. For many of us, it was our introduction to RPGs, to strategy, the joy of exploration and discovery. I was literally 10 years old when Generation 1 happened, so I'm a Gen 1er. I've been here since the beginning. The games taught us type matchups, team builds, resource management. They taught us that preparation and strategy could overcome obstacles. They taught us that the world was vast and full of secrets. And watching that legacy be stripped away piece by piece, year after year, it hurts. Not because I hate Pokemon, but because I love what it was, and I mourn what it's becoming. But here's the thing. The Pokemon we fell in love with, it still exists. You can go back and play Platinum and Black 2 and Emerald. They're still there. They're still excellent. The Battle Frontier still works. Mount Cornet is still a maze. The challenge is still real. You can play Monster Hunter Stories 2 and experience what modern Pokemon could be. You can still support indie developers making these games Game Freak won't. You can join communities of fans who remember what made Pokemon special and keep that spirit alive. And maybe, if enough of us demand better, if enough of us support games that respect our intelligence, if enough of us refuse to accept mediocrity, maybe Game Freak will remember what made Pokemon legendary in the first place. But until then, we have our memories, we have the old games, we got the alternatives, and we have a community that will never forget what Pokemon used to be when it was an adventure. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, leave a comment at the bottom with your first Pokemon game and your favorite Pokemon game. I'm genuinely curious to know how many people started in the golden era. I personally started playing Pokemon when Red and Blue first came out, and it was crazy. And if you played Monster Hunter Stories 2, let me know what your favorite monster is. And if you haven't played Monster Hunter Stories 2 yet, there's a demo available on Switch and on Steam. Try it out. You might like it. It might be the Pokemon game that you've been waiting for. I'm Captain Old School. Good luck, stay safe, and let's go be great.